Does Jimmy Butler want out of Minnesota? What would happen to cause Tom Thibodeau to be replaced? Are the Wolves in better shape going into this season? The only question left is, say it with me, you win. Hey sports fans, Coach Nick here, and welcome to the B-Ball Breakdown Podcast. Today I am pleased to have on the show, friend of the breakdown, Darren Wolfson, from the ABC affiliate and ESPN radio affiliate in the Twin Cities. And we're going to talk a little bit about the Minnesota Timberwolves and what's happening there. A little bit of a story popped up on Friday. So, Darren, thanks for coming on the show. Let's get into it. What is going on with the state of the Timberwolves and Thibodeau and Jimmy Butler?
Well, and Coach Nick, thank you for having me on. A happy Monday to you. I appreciate you having me on. Definitely followed your work from afar and thoroughly enjoy your work. I don't know. I mean, that's a really open-ended question. It's a question many of us here in the Twin Cities, many people outside, national NBA folks, are trying to figure out. I mean, I think with Tom Thibodeau as the coach / general manager / I guess Scott Layden has the title of GM, but coach / president of operations, with him having final say, to me it's always a year-to-year deal. I mean, I don't know how much long-term vision there is here, but you know what? They made the playoffs for the first time in 14 years last year. I don't think you win 47 games by accident. If you think about the lowly Wolves history, 47 wins in the regular season is one of the better seasons in their franchise's history. So Tom Thibodeau did a lot of good last year. But in terms of long-term vision, that I don't know. But you have Andrew Wiggins about to start a 5-year max extension this upcoming season. They figured to sign Karl Anthony Towns to an even bigger max extension. Owner Glenn Taylor told me on Friday, I had him on my podcast, Coach Nick, he told me on Friday he absolutely expects Karl Anthony Towns to sign that max extension offer sooner rather than later. Mm-hmm. The elephant in the room is Jimmy Butler. I mean, if you knew that Jimmy Butler would be here for the foreseeable future, that's beyond next summer when he can choose unrestricted free agency, you feel pretty good about this team's chances moving forward. But with that up in the air, who the heck knows? But I still think they slot into the top 8 in the Western Conference, but are they more like a 4 seed? Are they more like a 3 seed? Or are they like last season, more like a 7 or an 8 seed? So I don't know. Tough question to answer. I don't think the future is as dire as maybe others think, but I don't know how bright the future is.
Okay, a lot to unpack there. So let's look at Jimmy Butler's contract situation. He is under contract for $20.5 million for 2018-19. He's got his own option in 2019-20 to either renew. So what came out on Friday, just so my mind is never that clear with how contracts and all that stuff work, is did they offer him an extension and he declined it?
That is correct. Yeah, Coach Nick. And that's certainly not groundbreaking. I guess where it is groundbreaking is, the owner going on the record, somebody from the organization, or heck, somebody in those negotiations directly involved, whether it was Jimmy Butler's agent, Bernie Lee, or in this case, the owner, Glenn Taylor, somebody went on the record to say, hey, he turned it down. But the fact that he turned it down is not necessarily a surprise. I mean, just logically speaking, he can wait a year from now. He can sign an extension with the Wolves for 5 years worth up to $190 million. He can sign with another team. A lot of people have speculated about whether it's the Knicks, the Nets, any number of teams will have cap space a summer from now. He can sign a 4-year, $140 million deal with, you name the team that's not the Wolves. So why would you sign a 4-year, $110 million extension right now? I don't think it says anything about his feelings long-term about the franchise. I just think from a logical standpoint, he can make a ton more money a year from now. Now, I get it. He's been injury-prone. There is an injury history there with Jimmy. Jimmy plays the game so incredibly hard, that some sort of catastrophic injury could always happen. A Boogie Cousins like Achilles-type injury. I mean, you can't dismiss that from the realm of possibilities. But I think if you're Bernie Lee, if you're Jimmy Butler, you are betting on him maintaining relative health this upcoming year and then choosing unrestricted free agency a year from now where you can make either $140 million from another team or $190 million to stay here in Minnesota.
Well, I know with all that extra money, Jimmy Butler certainly wouldn't be worried about losing his hair anytime soon, but you may be. It's a very real possibility, and in the past, we'd have to shrug and wear our Just Another Sexy Bald Guy t-shirts, but not anymore. Hims is a one-stop shop for hair loss, skincare, and sexual wellness for men. Hims will connect you with real doctors with medical-grade solutions to get the hair growing back on your head. No awkward doctor visits where you have to bend over and cough. No wasting time with a bunch of nervous people in the waiting room. Just open up that browser window, type in forhims.com, and the solution to your problems gets shipped to your door. Order now. My listeners get a free trial month of Hims for just $5 today, right now, while supplies last. See website for full details. This would cost hundreds if you went to the doctor or a pharmacy. Go to forhims.com/Coach Nick. That's forhims.com/Coach Nick, and throw away that other t-shirt that says it's not a bald spot, it's a solar panel for a sex machine. For sure. And I've kind of gotten burned recently because I used to say, if the guy isn't saying to the fan base and to everybody in the organization, I want to retire a Timberwolf, then usually it kind of means they're going to leave. However, we've seen a couple of things in the more recent past that maybe have blown up that theory a little bit. So now, has Jimmy Butler spoken at all about the reaction to that from Friday?
He has not. Now, my understanding is he will do the Bill Simmons podcast, The Ringer, at some point this week. So that will be his opportunity to break his silence. I know some individuals have reached out to his agent, Bernie Lee, who's normally an open book, but I know Bernie has gone pretty silent on this. So right now, all we have is what the owner, Glenn Taylor, has offered up. As good a coach as Tom Thibodeau is, he's not exactly an open book. I mean, he's the flip side in terms of being open. I mean, and heck, covering Flip Saunders for the longest time, the late great Flip Saunders. Flip was an open book. So Tibbs is certainly a 360-degree change from what many of us here in the Minnesota media are used to. But hey, I've always said this about Tibbs: at least he treats all of us the same. He may not like any of us, but he doesn't like any of us all equally the same. But certainly trying to get information from Tibbs, from Scott Layden, from anybody else in that front office has been very, very challenging. But yeah, I mean, to me, what I'd like to hear is, from Tibbs or from Jimmy is there any inkling whatsoever that you want to leave? Like Aaron Mintz and Paul George were nice enough a year ago to go to the Pacers and lay everything out and say, hey, we have no intention whatsoever of signing a long-term deal here. Then Kevin Pritchard makes a genius trade. At the time we thought, Oladipo, Sabonis, blah. But it turns out the Pacers made a genius trade. It would be nice to know if Jimmy has any intention whatsoever, if he's thinking whatsoever at all about leaving. Because if he is, then if you're Minnesota, it would make some sense to trade him. But do I think that Tom Thibodeau, as close as he is to Jimmy Butler, will ever trade Jimmy Butler? I'm just telling you, Coach Nick, the answer is no. I can't foresee a situation where Tibbs, being as close as he is to Jimmy, that Tibbs would pull the trigger. Even if Tibbs has some sort of inkling that Jimmy might go elsewhere, I think Tibbs is still going to bet on, well, first off, $50 million more that they could offer, and he's going to bet on his relationship with Jimmy. So I think Tibbs is going to roll the dice that they can re-sign Jimmy a year from now.
So that's a very interesting thing, because my take on that would be, yes, Jimmy and Tibbs, they're like peas in the pod. He loves being coached that way, and he wouldn't want to leave. But that might not be the reason why Jimmy Butler wants to leave. And so that's what I think is interesting about this, because it does feel to me, and I'm not at the very many games, but I'm watching him on TV, and you can hear the constant bellowing, especially on defense, of Tibbs, being on his guys, demanding accountability, trying to get them to play as hard as they can. My fear when you do something like that so much, and if I can hear it all the time on the TV, I can only imagine what it's like in real time. What happens if the younger guys don't respond to that at all? We're talking about Karl Anthony Towns and Mitchell Wiggins, both who've struggled tremendously in the defensive end under the tutelage of Tibbs for now. It's been several seasons. So is it possible that Jimmy Butler is looking at all this and thinking, these are the guys I don't want to roll with in this environment, and it might be time for me to get out of here?
I think that's absolutely possible. Now, do I think some of the national reports that have come out the last handful of weeks, whether from the Sporting News or the Chicago Sun-Times, that certainly got aggregated, in all the major websites, do I think some of those were overstated? I do. But do I also think that Jimmy Butler is still trying to figure out, after a full season, of how he can coexist with Andrew Wiggins, with Karl Anthony Towns? Yeah, I do. And not only those two. I think Jeff Teague, I think Tyus Jones, even though him and Tyus are are very close off the court. I can just tell you off the court, my understanding is there's not much of a relationship, Jimmy with Wiggins, Jimmy with Karl Anthony Towns. Not that they dislike each other, but in terms of just going out for a bite to eat, anything like that, I mean, the guys Jimmy was closest to last year, I think, were Tyus Jones, Marcus George's son, and Jamal Crawford. And Jamal is best friends with everybody.
Right.
So but I think on the court, I mean, who cares about off the court, I guess, Coach Nick? I mean, on the court, I think Jimmy's still trying to figure all that out. I think what's possible is Jimmy still has a relatively open mind to figuring out if he can be here, still wants to see if this thing can work, but it's also possible that he's laying the groundwork, at least internally, his camp, that, hey, I'd love to play with my buddy Kyrie Irving. These teams that have 2 max slots, it would make some sense for me and Kyrie to team up. Let's go to Brooklyn, or you name the franchise. So I think both possibilities are in play. I mean, that's the slippery slope. That's the dangerous spot the Wolves are in, because as I talked to owner Glenn Taylor about, I mean, can you imagine a year from now if the Wolves lose Jimmy Butler and get nothing in return? I mean, that would be devastating for this franchise. So that to me is why Tibbs needs to have a heart-to-heart with Jimmy at some point. But I'm telling you, even if he has that heart-to-heart, maybe he's already had that heart-to-heart, they certainly communicate darn near daily. Maybe not on the phone, but at least via text. But I don't know if they've had that heart-to-heart yet. Mm-hmm. If Tibbs, I'm just telling you, Coach Nick, if Tibbs has any inkling whatsoever that Jimmy wants to be elsewhere, I don't think you can roll those dice. But I'm just telling you, my sense is Tibbs is going to roll those dice and say 1 year from now we can offer him 5 years, $190 million. Nobody can come close to that sort of long-term stability. We can offer the extra year. We can offer $50 million more. That will put us over the top. But I think those are dangerous dice to roll in my mind.
For sure, especially if, let's just say, the Bulls end up really getting something in Wendell Carter, and then Zach LaVine comes back and he is really good, and they overperform. Suddenly now you're looking at that trade, and that kind of reflects poorly on Tibbs if he leaves with nothing. So in my mind, if they get that extent, or if they're able to sign him to that max after this coming up season, I don't know. Part of me feels like you would potentially see one, like Mitchell Wiggins gone, right? Like, is that a possibility?
Yeah, well, I mean, if you're asking me right now, heck, go with the cliched, you put a gun to my temple and say, hey, yes or no, will Andrew Wiggins be here by the end of his contract? I would tell you, Coach Nick, I don't think so. Now I think one day he probably wants to play in his hometown of Toronto. I mean, could you work a deal with the Raptors? That's a different conversation. But I'm just telling you, do I think that 5 years from now, so Wiggins is about to start his 5-year, $148 million extension this upcoming season, do I think 4 seasons from now, heading into 4 seasons from now, that Andrew Wiggins is a member of the Wolves? No, I don't. I'll also tell you this much. As I love Jimmy Butler, and to me you have to give him the money. I mean, if he's willing to stay here 5 years, $190 million, you have to do it. But look at all the games he has missed going back the last few years. How crazy a style he plays. I mean, does anybody track more miles on a per-game basis, running all around the court, playing both ends of the court? Does anybody play harder than Jimmy Butler? There are guys that maybe play as hard as Jimmy, but I don't think there are guys that play harder than Jimmy Butler. Mm-hmm. And you look at all those games he's missed. I'm just telling you, I would hesitate at least a little bit, wondering about 4 and 5 years from now when Jimmy is in his mid-30s, paying him $40-45 million a year. That would make me very nervous, but that's what the Wolves have put themselves in a position, to do, because to me, you can't lose Jimmy for nothing. So the alternative is you just hope he can find a way to stay healthy and his body ages well. But I'm just telling you, that would be something that would make me nervous. That years 4 and 5 of the Jimmy Butler contract, when he's making $40-45 million a year, can you rely on him for forget 82 games? Can you even rely on him for 72 games? Right. I mean, I would be very nervous about that.
Right, because I'm looking at it. I'm not kind of surprised right now that he was averaging 36.7 minutes per game last year in only 59 games played. I kind of was assuming before I called it up it would be like almost 40. I forgot that they were able to actually cut it down to something normal, but they're not normal for him. His 36 minutes are the equivalent of a 40-minute game for somebody else the way he plays. So I hear you loud and clear, especially the 32-year-old Jimmy Butler making that much money. And by the way, Wiggins making as much money as he does now almost makes him difficult to trade anyway. So
although you know what, Coach Nick, I'll tell you this much. I've heard of teams that, and it's a league that's starving for wings. I mean, heck, 2 years ago when he played half the season, in fact, 65-70% of the season as a 21-year-old, and he averaged, before Jimmy Butler got here, he averaged nearly 24 points a game. And I get it. He takes bad shots. I mean, we can nitpick Andrew Wiggins' game, don't get me wrong, and he did not have a good year last year for his standards. Heck, for many people's standards, he didn't have a good year. But I'm just saying, he's 23 now. Even at that money, I think you could trade that contract. If you have to trade that contract, you could trade that contract.
Okay.
But the unfortunate thing is, your hope was when you moved Kevin Love years ago, you acquired Andrew Wiggins, that he would turn into a superstar. And he showed some flashes. I mean, I'm just saying 2 years ago, or even under Sam Mitchell, God love Sam, who's now doing well. I know as a University of Memphis assistant, I like Sam. I'm still in contact with Sam on a pretty regular basis. I think Andrew had his moments under Sam. So maybe Andrew can figure things out more so if there's a new coach here, and that's another elephant in the room. Tibbs after next year will have 2 years remaining on his 5-year contract. It's a little bit easier to eat 2 years, $16 million, compared to 3 years, $24 million.
Right.
So if they don't win another 47 games, 48 games, and heck, in that loaded Western Conference, they may not be in the top 8. I think they will be, but I'm just saying it's entirely possible they miss the playoffs next year. I'm just telling you, if they miss the playoffs, not only I think can Jimmy Butler end up elsewhere, I wouldn't be shocked if Tom Thibodeau was out of here too.
Wow, Darren, you're making a little too much sense for me.
Although you know what, there hasn't been a whole lot of sense around here, Coach Nick. I mean, I'm just telling you. I mean, I like Glenn Taylor, the owner, because heck, how many owners call you back? How many owners will spend 30 minutes? I had him for 30 minutes on my podcast on Friday. I mean, I don't know anything about Dan Gilbert or you name the owner, but I don't think many owners are spending 30 minutes doing a podcast.
Yeah.
So I love Glenn Taylor's accessibility, but there's been a lot of decisions, whether it was David Kahn, or any number of other decisions over the years. I mean, outside of him saving the team 20-plus years ago from moving to New Orleans, I mean, there's a lot of Wolves fans that will tell you, Coach Nick, it's time for new ownership. That Glenn Taylor has made so many boneheaded decisions. So I'm just telling you, when it comes to the Minnesota Timberwolves and things making sense, you go back over time. I mean, go back 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. Not many things do make sense.
Well, what makes perfect sense to me is avoiding the doctor's office when getting your contact lenses. It's such a hassle when you run out. And finally, there's a genius solution. Simple Contacts. They let you renew your prescription and reorder your contacts from anywhere in minutes. They have a cool app that will test your vision in less than 5 minutes, then send the results to their licensed ophthalmologists who will review and prescribe the right contact lenses for you. This test only costs $20, which is great since a doctor's visit without insurance could cost you $200. Plus, their lens prices are unbeatable, standard shipping is free, and best of all, I've got an even better deal for you. If you head over to simplecontacts.com/CoachNick20, you'll get $20 off your first Simple Contacts order. That's simplecontacts.com/CoachNick20, or just enter my code CoachNick20 at checkout. This isn't a replacement for your periodic full eye health exam, and they only test that your current prescription still helps you see 20/20 and renew that prescription. They don't write completely new prescriptions or examine eye health. So, save $20 by using my code CoachNick20 and make renewing your contact lenses a clearer reality. Well, they could trade Wiggins for DeRozan because their contracts are almost the same. And then now you're talking about Wiggins going home to Canada, which could maybe...
Yeah, although does Toronto do that deal? I don't think Toronto would do that deal today. Maybe they do it in a year, but then you're also stuck if you're the Wolves because DeRozan would be a couple years removed from free agency or a year removed, right? Yep. So, do you want DeRozan? I mean, I think if you move Wiggins, you almost need to just hit the reset button and go way young if that's possible. I get it that you'd probably have to take back some ridiculous contract just to make money work. Yeah. But I would think you'd want to hit the reset button in many ways. Even though you got Karl Anthony Towns, a transformational talent, I don't think if you ever have Towns that you fully need to hit the reset button. But you get what I'm saying. That if you end up losing Jimmy and you want to make a change with Wiggins, to me, you'd have to go real young. But if you lose Jimmy, maybe it makes sense to hold on to Andrew and see if Andrew can ever meet those expectations. And maybe Andrew would be a much better player without Jimmy.
Yeah.
So I just say it's a fascinating season in so many ways. Last year was just because they had so much free agent money to spend, and they brought in Jeff Teague, and they brought in Taj Gibson, and they brought in Jamal Crawford. This year is another fascinating year. The changes are not aplenty. I mean, Anthony Tolliver will be the big off-season acquisition, and I think they'll end up missing Nemanja Bjelica, and some of the bid pieces, will be different. But the big off-season addition is Anthony Tolliver, who I think will help. But let's be frank. I mean, Jeff Teague, Andrew Wiggins, Jimmy Butler, Karl Anthony Towns, and Taj Gibson are probably going to be on the court a ton next year together, just like they were last year. Although I know Tibbs wants to go a little bit more small. We saw it in the playoffs against Houston with Jimmy playing the floor.
Yeah.
So maybe we see some lineups where, Jimmy and Tolliver are on the floor, Taj isn't on the floor maybe as much, but that foursome of Towns, Butler, Wiggins, and Teague are going to be on the floor a ton together. So that to me is what's fascinating is, can they take another step? Now, when those guys were on the floor together, by the way, if you look at both the offensive and defensive efficiency numbers, they were really good. I mean, the Wolves stunk last year because the bench was abysmal. I mean, it was rock bottom. So when those four are on the court, they're a good team. They just need to find a way to keep Jeff Teague healthy, who missed a handful of games last year, and then Jimmy Butler missed 22, 23 games. I just don't think you can win, especially with how deep the West is next year. I don't think you can win if Jimmy Butler's going to miss another 15, 20 games and Jeff Teague ends up missing, 8 to 15 games.
For sure. Well, listen, Darren, that was awesome stuff. Way to break that down for us. It looks really clear to me. I bet you Tibbs is gone if they can't match that win total and do better. We'll have to keep our eye and see. So we'll make sure we follow you on Twitter and everything else and see what happens with this story. So, again, thanks for coming on the show. I appreciate it. And don't forget, sports fans, at B-Ball Breakdown, run a channel. We're a conversation. You in? Are you in, Darren?
I am in, and I will win, Nick. I always listen to your stuff, so appreciate you having me on.